Special Reports is a daily show that will cover issues surrounding the economic collapse. All our reports and daily alert news are backed up by source links. We work very hard to bring you the facts and we research everything before presenting the report. Subscribe for latest on financial crisis, oil price, global economic collapse, dollar collapse, gold, silver, Bitcoin, global reset, new world order, economic collapse, economic news, political, geopolitical news. Today, we talk about Russia and China challenge U.S. dollar domination. The Russian government has recently announced it will issue nearly $1 billion equivalent in state bonds, but denominated not in U.S. dollars, as is mostly the case. Rather, it will be the first sale of Russian bonds in China's yuan. While $1 billion may not sound like much when compared with the People's Bank of China total holdings of U.S. government debt of more than $1 trillion, or to the U.S. federal debt today of over $20 trillion, its significance lies beyond the nominal amount. It is a test run by both governments of the potential for state financing of infrastructure and other projects independent of dollar risk from such events as U.S. Treasury financial sanctions, Russian debt and China yuan. Since the August 1998 sovereign default triggered by the West, Russian state finances have been prudent to almost default. The size of the national government debt is the lowest of any major industrial country, a mere 10.6% of GDP for the current year. This has enabled Russia to withstand the U.S. financial warfare sanctions imposed since 2014 and force the country to turn elsewhere for their financial stability. That elsewhere is increasingly called the People's Republic of China. Now the Russian Ministry of Finance is reportedly planning the first sale of Russian debt in the form of bonds denominated in Chinese yuan currency. The size of the first offering, a testing of the market, will be 6 billion yuan, or just under $1 billion. The sale is being organized by the state-owned Russian Gazprom Bank, the Bank of China Ltd., and China's largest state bank, Industrial and Commercial Bank of China. The move is being accelerated by reports that the U.S. Treasury is examining potential consequences of extending penalties, until now concentrated on Russian oil and gas projects, to include Russian sovereign debt in its sanctions warfare. The new yuan bond will be traded on the Moscow exchange and will aim to sell to mainland Chinese investors as well as international and Russian borrowers at attractive interest rates. Western sanctions or threats of sanctions are forcing Russia and China to cooperate more strategically on what is becoming the seed of a genuine alternative to the dollar system. The Russian yuan debt offerings will also give a significant boost to China's desire to build the yuan as an accepted international currency. China Petro Yuan. The steps to begin issuing Russian state debt in yuan are paralleled by another major development towards broader international yuan acceptance vis-a-vis the U.S. dollar. On December 13, Chinese regulators completed final testing in preparation for launch of not a dollar-backed, but rather, a yuan-backed oil futures contract to be traded on the Shanghai Futures Exchange. The implications are potentially large. China is the world's largest oil importing country. Control of financial oil futures markets until now has been the tightly guarded province of Wall Street banks and the New York, London, and other futures exchanges they control. Emergence of Shanghai as a major yuan-based oil futures center could significantly weaken dollar domination of oil trade. Since the 1970s oil shock and the 400% rise in the oil price from OPEC countries, Washington has maintained a strict regime in which the world's most valuable commodity, oil, would be traded in U.S. dollars alone. In December 1974, the U.S. Treasury signed a secret agreement in Riyadh with the Saudi Arabian Monetary Agency to establish a new relationship through the Federal Reserve Bank of New York with the U.S. Treasury borrowing operation to buy U.S. government debt with surplus petrodollars. The Saudis agreed to enforce OPEC dollar-only oil sales in return for U.S. sales of advanced military equipment, purchased for dollars of course, and a guarantee of protection from possible Israeli attack. This was the beginning of what then U.S. Secretary of State Henry Kissinger called recycling the petrodollar. To the present, only two oil export country leaders, Iraq's Saddam Hussein and Libya's Gaddafi, have tried to change the system and sell oil for euros or gold dinars. Now China is challenging the petrodollar system in a different way with the petro yuan. The difference between Saddam Hussein or Gaddafi is that far more influential countries, Russia, and now Iran, with China's implicit support, are cooperating to avoid the dollar out of necessity forced by U.S. pressure. That is a far stronger challenge to the U.S. dollar than Iraq or Libya could ever manage. The China-Yuan oil futures contract now will allow China's trading partners to pay with gold or to convert yuan into gold without the necessity to keep money in Chinese assets or turn it into U.S. dollars. Oil exporters such as Russia or Iran or Venezuela, all targets of U.S. sanctions, can avoid those U.S. sanctions by avoiding oil trades in dollars now. This past September, Venezuela responded to U.S. sanctions by ordering the state oil company and traders to make oil sale contracts into euro and not to pay or be paid in U.S. dollars any longer. Gold for oil. The Shanghai International Energy Exchange will soon launch their crude oil futures contract denominated in yuan. The Shanghai International Energy Exchange futures contract will streamline and solidify the process of selling oil to China for yuan that Russia began after sanctions in 2014. This will also allow other oil producers around the world to sell their oil for yuan instead of dollars. The crude oil futures contract will be the first commodity contract in China open to foreign investment funds, trading houses, and oil firms. The circumvention of U.S. dollar trade could allow oil exporters such as Russia and Iran, for example, to bypass U.S. sanctions. To make the offer more attractive, China has linked the crude oil futures contract with the option to efficiently convert yuan into physical gold through gold exchanges in Shanghai and Hong Kong. According to Wang Zemin, director of the Center for Globalization and Modernization at China's Institute of Foreign Economy and Trade, the possibility of converting the yuan oil futures into gold will give the Chinese futures a competitive advantage over Brent and West Texas Intermediate benchmarks. Now Russia or Iran or other oil producers are in a position to sell oil to China for yuan or rubles, bypassing the dollar entirely. The shift is about to take place in the coming weeks as the yuan oil futures contract is officially launched. Further, in October, China and Russia launched what is called a payment versus payment (PVP) system for Chinese yuan and Russian ruble transactions that will reduce settlement risk for oil and other trades. Already reportedly, Russian oil and gas sales to China are being conducted in ruble and yuan, and since the foolish U.S. effort to isolate Qatar in the Persian Gulf, Qatar, a major LNG gas supplier to China, has switched to pricing in yuan. Pressure is growing that at some point Saudi Arabia breaks its 1974 pact with Washington and sells its oil to China also for yuan. Iran to join the EU. A new element is about to be added to the growing cooperation across Eurasia centered around China and Russia, namely Iran. According to Bayrout's Hassan Al-Fat of Iran's trade promotion organization, in a statement carried on Iranian state-owned Press TV, as early as February 2018, Iran is set to become a member of Russia's Eurasian Economic Union. Presently, the Eurasian Economic Union, created in 2015, includes Russia, Kazakhstan, Belarus, Armenia, and Kyrgyzstan, to create a large zone for free transit of goods, services, capital, and workers among member states. Presently, the Eurasian Economic Union is a market of 183 million people. Addition of Iran with its more than 80 million citizens would give a major boost to the economies of the Eurasian Economic Union and to its economic importance, creating a common market of more than 263 million, with skilled labor, engineers, scientists, and industrial know-how. Iran has already announced, in face of escalating threats from Washington, that it seeks ways to sell its oil for non-dollar currencies. Integration into the Eurasian Economic Union could bring a solution to this, as Iran, Russia, and China inevitably draw closer in face of relentless U.S. pressures on all three. Increasingly in proportion to the pressure from the West, the nations of Eurasia are developing modes of growing their economies independent of U.S. Treasury financial sanctions. In retrospect, it is likely that those U.S. sanctions will be seen as one of the more stupid attempts of Washington to dominate the economies of Eurasia. China plans to break petrodollar's stranglehold. Beijing to set up oil futures trading in the yuan, which will be fully convertible into gold on the Shanghai and Hong Kong exchanges. Petrodollars have dominated the global energy markets for more than 40 years. But now, China is looking to change that by replacing the word dollars for yuan. Nations, of course, have tried this before since the system was set up by former U.S. Secretary of State Henry Kissinger in tandem with the House of Saud back in 1974. Vast populations across the Middle East and Northern Africa quickly felt the consequences when Iraq's Saddam Hussein decided to sell oil in euros. Then there was Libya's Muammar Gaddafi's Pan-African gold dinar blueprint, which failed to create a splash in an oil barrel. Fast forward 25 years and China is making a move to break the United States petrodollar stranglehold. The plan is to set up oil futures trading in the yuan, which will be fully convertible into gold on the Shanghai and Hong Kong foreign exchange markets. The Shanghai Futures Exchange and its subsidiary, the Shanghai International Energy Exchange, INE, have already run 4 simulations for crude futures. It was expected to be rolled out by the end of this year, but that looks unlikely to happen. But when it does get off the ground in 2018, the fundamentals will be clear. This triple oil yuan gold route will bypass the mighty greenback. The era of the petro-yuan will be at hand. Still, there are questions on how Beijing will technically set up a rival futures market in crude oil to Brent and WTI, and how China's capital controls will influence it. Beijing has been quite discreet on this. The petro-yuan was not even mentioned in the National Development and Reform Commission documents following the 19th National Congress of the Communist Party last October. What is certain is that the BRICS, the acronym for Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, did support the petro-yuan move at their summit in Xiamen earlier this year. Diplomats confirmed that to Asia Times. Venezuela is also on board. It is crucial to remember that Russia is number 2 and Venezuela is number 7 among the world's top 10 oil producers. Beijing already has close economic ties with Moscow, while it is distinctly possible that other producers will join the club. An extensive report by DBS in Singapore also hits most of the right notes, linking the internationalization of the yuan with the expansion of the grandiose Belt and Road Initiative. Next year, 6 major BRI projects will be on the table. Mega infrastructure developments will include the Jakarta-Bandung high-speed railway, the China-Laos railway, and the Addis Ababa-Djibouti railway. The other key projects will be the Hungary-Serbia railway, the Malacca Gateway project in Malaysia, and the upgrading of Gwalior port in Pakistan. HSBC has estimated that the expansive Belt and Road program will generate no less than an additional game-changing $0.5 trillion worth of new trade a year. It is important to remember that the Belt in BRI is a series of corridors connecting eastern China with oil-gas-rich regions in Central Asia and the Middle East. The high-speed rail networks, or new Silk Roads, will simply traverse regions filled with, what else, unmined gold. But a key to the future of the petro-yuan will revolve around the House of Saud and what it will do. Should the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman bin Abdulaziz Al Saud, also known as MBS, follow Russia's lead? If it did, this would be one of the paradigm shifts of the century. Yet there are signs of what could happen. Yuan-denominated gold contracts will be traded not only in Shanghai and Hong Kong, but also in Dubai. Saudi Arabia is also considering issuing so-called panda bonds, with close ally the United Arab Emirates taking the lead in the Middle East for Chinese interbank bonds. Of course, the prelude to D-Day will be when the House of Saud officially announces it accepts the yuan for at least part of its exports to China. But what is clear is that Saudi Arabia simply cannot afford to alienate Beijing as one of its top customers. In the end, it will be China which will dictate future terms. That may include extra pressure for Beijing's participation in Aramco's IPO. In parallel, Washington would seriously embracing the petro-yuan as the ultimate red line. An independent European report pointed to what might be Beijing's trump card, an authorization to issue treasury bills in yuan by Saudi Arabia, as well as the creation of a Saudi investment fund and a 5% share of Aramco. Nations hit hard by U.S. sanctions, such as Russia, Iran, and Venezuela, will be among the first to embrace the petro-yuan. Smaller producers, such as Angola and Nigeria, are already selling oil and gas to the world's second-largest economy in Chinese currency. As for nations involved in the new Silk Roads program, that are not oil exporters such as Pakistan, the least they can do is replace the dollar in bilateral trade. This is what Pakistan's Interior Minister Iqbal is currently mulling over. Of course, there will be a pushback from the U.S. The dollar is still the global currency, even though it might have lost some of luster in the past decade. But the BRICS, as well as the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, or SCO, which includes prospective members Iran and Turkey, are increasingly settling bilateral and multilateral trade by bypassing the greenback. In the end, it will not be over until the fat, golden lady sings. When the beginning of the end of the petrodollar system becomes a fact, watch out for a U.S. counterpunch. Thanks for watching. Tell us what you think in the comments section below.